Inquisitive minds, exploring the layers of tradition and choice in the veiled ritual. The morning of August 15th dawned with a radiant sun casting its golden glow over the small town of Brookside. The air was filled with the sweet fragrance of blooming flowers, and the lush green grass painted a picturesque scene. The townspeople gathered in the town square, a quaint space nestled between the bakery and the library, around 10 o'clock. Unlike larger towns where such events took days, in Brookside, with its modest population of around 300, the entire affair would conclude in just a couple of hours, leaving ample time for everyone to return home for lunch. As the school had recently concluded for the summer, the children, still adjusting to the newfound freedom, hesitated before bursting into playful chatter. Small groups formed, recalling classroom memories and discussing summer plans. Charlie Mitchell, having collected a pocketful of smooth pebbles, led a few boys in creating a pile of stones in one corner of the square. The girls, standing apart, engaged in their own conversations, occasionally glancing at the boys and giggling. The youngest children played in the dust or clung to their older siblings' hands. Soon, the men of the town began to gather, engaging in discussions about crops, weather, and the upcoming harvest. They stood together, their banter quiet, and smiles replacing hearty laughter. The women, adorned in faded summer dresses and sweaters, joined shortly after. Warm greetings and snippets of gossip filled the air as they congregated around their husbands. The children, now reluctantly responding to their mothers' calls, gradually returned, leaving the pile of stones temporarily unguarded. The lottery in Brookside, just like square dances and summer festivals, was overseen by Mr. Thompson. A round-faced and genial man who managed the local grocery store, Mr. Thompson was known for his civic involvement. He arrived in the square, carrying a new-looking wooden box, and greeted the villagers with a wave, saying, "A little late today, folks." Following him was the postmaster, Mr. Palmer, holding a three-legged stool. The stool was placed at the center of the square, and Mr. Thompson positioned the wooden box on it. Maintaining a distance, the townspeople created a semicircle around the stool, leaving a gap between themselves and the mysterious box. When Mr. Thompson called out, "Anyone willing to give me a hand?" there was a moment of hesitation before two men, Mr. Davis and his eldest son, Ethan, stepped forward to stabilize the box on the stool while Mr. Thompson mixed the papers inside. The original tools of the lottery, like so many traditions, had been lost over time. The current box, though no longer completely black and showing signs of wear, had been in use even before Old Man Anderson, the town's eldest resident, was born. Mr. Thompson often proposed the idea of creating a new box, but the villagers hesitated to disrupt a tradition as ingrained as the black box. There were rumors that the existing box had been crafted from remnants of its predecessor, constructed when the town was first settled. Mr. Thompson spoke of making a new box each year after the lottery, but the enthusiasm waned, and the aging black box continued to serve its purpose. Mr. Davis and Ethan held the box securely on the stool as Mr. Thompson stirred the papers inside, replacing the old wooden chips with slips of paper, a recent change to accommodate the growing population. The townspeople, now ready for the ceremony, waited for Mr. Thompson to officially commence the lottery. Lists were checked, families were accounted for, and Mr. Palmer administered the traditional oath to Mr. Thompson, acknowledging him as the lottery's official. Once the preliminary steps were completed, Mr. Thompson began the ritual, and Mrs. Simmons, having remembered the day's significance just in time, rushed to join the gathering. Clean forgot what day it was, Mrs. Simmons confessed to Mrs. Peterson as she slid into place at the back of the crowd. They shared a soft laugh, and Mrs. Simmons continued, "Thought my old man was out back tending to the garden. Then I looked out the window, and the kids were gone. Remembered it was the 15th and came running." She dried her hands on her apron and said her farewells to Mrs. Peterson, threading through the crowd to join her family. The people willingly made way for her, and a few good-natured remarks such as "Your missus is here, Simmons," and well done, she made it, rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Simmons reached her husband, and Mr. Thompson, acknowledging her arrival, said, "Thought we might have to start without you, Tessie." Mrs. Simmons grinned, replying, "Wouldn't want to leave my dishes in the sink, Joe," eliciting soft laughter from the gathered crowd. Mr. Thompson, aiming to conclude the proceedings efficiently, said, "Well, now, guess we better get started. Let's get this over with so we can all get back to our work. Anyone missing?" Mrs. Simmons joined the assembly just in time, and the ceremony proceeded. Mr. Thompson, with a sense of sobriety, announced, "Guess we better get started, get this over with, so's we can go back to work. Anybody ain't here?" The crowd fell into a hushed silence, and the anticipation for the annual ritual heightened. The sun continued to cast its warm glow as Mr. Thompson, with Mr. Davis and Ethan by his side, commenced the initial drawing to determine the household. There was a collective sigh of relief from those not chosen, and in one case, a family member was dispatched to convey the news to an injured father that their family was safe for another year. The slips of paper were folded, and the process continued seamlessly. For the final drawing, one slip was placed in the box for each member of the Simmons household, Mr. and Mrs. Simmons and their 3 children. As each family member drew a slip, tension mounted. Mrs. Simmons, with a palpable sense of dread, pulled the slip marked for their family. A murmur rippled through the crowd as the townspeople, with somber expressions, picked up stones in hand. Tessie Simmons, realizing the implication of her draw, cried out about the unfairness of the lottery. The once cheerful atmosphere turned tense as the first stone was thrown. The air filled with a mix of shock and dismay, but soon, the crowd, driven by tradition, started pelting Tessie with stones. Her pleas and protests echoed against the backdrop of the square. The stoning continued, the stones landing with a harsh impact. The once cordial townspeople, overcome by the ritual, now participated in this grim tradition with grim determination. Tessie's desperate cries were drowned by the sound of stones hitting their mark. The sun, which had bathed the square in warm light, bore witness to the unsettling scene. The annual lottery, meant to ensure prosperity, had claimed its sacrifice. As the last stone was thrown, the square fell silent, the gravity of the ritual settling over the town. With the macabre tradition fulfilled, the townspeople dispersed quietly, returning to their homes as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. The once lively square was now deserted, leaving behind the remnants of a ritual that had become an indelible part of their lives. Brookside, a town like any other, had completed its annual lottery, a ceremony that fused tradition, fear, and an unspoken acceptance of a dark pact. The townspeople, though shaken, would resume their lives until the next year, when the black box would once again be brought out, and the unsettling lottery would claim another victim in the name of an age-old custom.